Good afternoon, or good morning, whatever time you may be joining us from. This is Mark Coggin. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing within the Platform Business Unit here at Red Hat. And I want to thank you for joining us to hear our topic today, Building a Bridge to the Next Generation Data Center. And I'm joined here with a colleague of mine, Kurt Milne, from the IT Process Institute. And today we're going to talk about some of the interesting topics that face the IT organization when faced with really deciding on platform infrastructure decisions. Ultimately, how their business results can be affected by decisions in the platform area that enable either agility, dynamic IT, but ultimately it really starts with the decision on how you standardized your platform choice. So I'd like to introduce Kurt Milne. Kurt is a colleague from, as I said, the IT Process Institute, and he's been in the technology industry for more than 20 years, focusing cross-functionally across many different areas, including management, marketing, also inside the engineering organization, and he's worked at leading technology companies like Hewlett-Packard and BMC. Kurt identifies key trends and focuses on the performance of leading IT organizations and undertakes dozens of major research studies looking at various data center operations topics such as control and governance, how that aligns to their strategies, but also specific to the topics of cloud and virtualization. And in April of last year, he released a book called Visible Ops Private Cloud, From Virtualization to Private Cloud in 4 Practical Steps. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Kurt, who will begin our presentation today.
Great, thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Today we're going to read backwards. We're going to go from right to left. We're going to start at the end, looking at the desired outcome, which is improved business results, and kind of step backwards through a series of 5 powerful ideas back to the beginning with the standardization on OS, and specifically Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And the reason is that OS standardization has a big impact on IT's ability to increase agility and responsiveness. And as we'll see, just focusing on cost reduction and improvements in operating efficiency, the numbers are pretty compelling. But we're also going to look at how in the next generation data center, the OS standardization can help meet agility needs more than ever before. So let's start with business results. So what we're really seeing right now is a shift in business strategies that rely more on agility. Now, having a monopoly is always good for profitability, but for all of us in businesses that aren't a monopoly, we need to find ways to meet our customers' needs. And increasingly, we're seeing businesses use agile startup methodologies to get minimally viable products out in their customers' hands to see how the market reacts. So what we're really seeing is more innovation using low-cost probes instead of big bets, lots of small bets, and then getting those new capabilities into customer hands faster, and then the flexibility to meet customer needs as they change. So we think of things like mass customization. So what we see is that the game-changing CIOs are really thinking about business outcomes first and looking at how IT can impact the business, and then looking at technology. So to achieve that kind of more agile business state requires increased agility within IT as well. You really can't have an agile business without agile IT. You can't put agile lipstick on a static, cumbersome, slow IT organization. So having a fast and lower cost prototyping capabilities, that require less capacity planning and infrastructure purchase up front, and having more accommodating IT processes. These are the kinds of things that IT organizations are doing to increase their agility to better meet those changing needs of the business. And what we see when we study top performers is that they really allow companies, users and requesters of IT services to kind of work at their own speed. So we see in this future state, IT organizations still in the critical path for getting products and services out to their customers, but really stepping back and letting those users, requesters of IT services, work at their own speed.
And Kurt, I think what we also see is that, ultimately organizations that become frustrated with their IT brethren, the line of business will effectively go around the IT organization and establish, their own shadow IT, their IT implementations, either through the use of outsourcers, consultants, or in some cases even staffing their own small architecture or infrastructure team. And that's clearly not beneficial to the IT organization or the company as a whole. It can result in disparate standards, strategies, and goals and alignment getting out of sync with the overall business and things like that. So that's clearly one thing you want to avoid, and ultimately increased IT agility can really mean that the LOB, the line of business, doesn't have to go around the IT organization to get what they need.
And I agree with you, and we see a lot of organizations that have that kind of shadow IT activity going on. There's really a mark of demand for these kind of more agile service delivery models. And so to become more agile requires deploying a new kind of more dynamic IT. And so when I say dynamic IT, I mean having on-demand service requests where users can request standardized services faster and a lower cost than requesting custom services, having resource pools that are shared that allow workloads to either scale up by having more resources applied in cases of high usage and demand, or scale out where additional instances are provisioned to meet that kind of fluctuation. And then also workload mobility, so being able to take a workload, move it within a cluster, within the data center, to another data center, or even to a public cloud service provider. So, we really see this kind of shift from static service models to more dynamic service models. And that requires real change. So there's more policy-based orchestration, there's more automation of provisioning, scaling, and those mobility capabilities, heavy utilization of virtualization of resources, that's server, memory, network, and storage, and then the higher degree of interoperability within and between these resource pools. So all of that is really required to enable that greater dynamic state for the data center of the future.
And I think one of the things that occurred, in the IT organization over the last 10 years is that, achieving dynamic IT, which is really an ongoing journey, really was undertaken in two phases or two waves. The first wave was really one about physical to virtual, trends, ultimately being driven by the need to get costs down, to consolidate server infrastructure and things like that, and really just kind of scaling back on the resources that existed and kind of getting control of those assets. But the second wave, which is really in full force now, is once that was done, there was a nice side benefit, which was effectively unleashing the agility that was now harnessed in the fact that they had consolidated resources. They had effectively created virtual pools of resources that could be deployed more flexibly, and so that this then was suddenly an unfound or a newly found jewel, which was, hey, look at this agility that we can unleash to our benefit, and really opened up the capabilities of the organization to do many, many more things much more effectively.
I agree with you, Mark, and I think that, in a kind of a two-wave model, the other thing that we could think about is that, in that first wave, there was a lot of consolidation, as you indicated, and really there was an effort to reduce complexity. In the second wave, we actually see new complexity and risk introduced by these more dynamic models. So, there's great benefits associated with better support for changing business needs. But this kind of real change can bring these new risk factors, adding layers of complexity. There's more tools required. There's movement and change of what was previously static infrastructure and environment. There are new security targets that are opened up, potentially because of the movement of critical workloads and data. There are compliance issues that need to be addressed that didn't exist before. And then there are also new cost factors to deal with, additional tools, There's more upfront effort setting up these kind of orchestration and policy-based systems, and there's new skills, networking, automation, and orchestration. So it's kind of this underlying question, which is, the benefits are great, but how do we address these new risk and cost factors that are introduced in the dynamic environment? So there's really kind of a key question, which is, is there a general strategy that can help us bridge from the current static state to more dynamic future state that enables these benefits but also helps manage the new costs and risks? And the good news is there isn't a single answer, and that is standardization. Standardization of infrastructure, of system configurations, which leads to standardization of operating procedures, is a good single strategy that can help bridge from current state to future state. And what we see with standardization, it really enables higher levels of automation and orchestration. It allows better interoperability by kind of removing some of the corner cases and exceptions. And then it also enables that mobility of workloads because the environments, where the workload is coming from and going to are the same or nearly the same. So I think a key part of that standardization is also what we call modernization, which is systematically removing what I call fragile artifacts. And fragile artifacts are those systems that have a low change success rate. They're often considered irreplaceable because the person that developed them is no longer in the organization. The system may be on older versions of infrastructure or middleware, not well documented. So these are the kind of systems you see sticky notes in the data center that say do not touch, because if they change or go down, it's a major issue or problem to resolve to get them back up to working state.
And what all this really means is it's a trend the IT organization is driving towards simplification. Again, part of the wave of doing all of this is around simplifying, standardizing, because ultimately you're reducing costs, you're removing complexity, you're getting a handle on what you've got in your assets and infrastructure, and therefore you're trying to set yourself up to being able to do things on a more repeatable basis, to set yourself up for doing other things with freed up resources, and to be more agile in the form of scaling up or scaling down. So there are just tremendous benefits to taking this approach.
So just to kind of summarize that thought, I mean, we see standardization as really having a 3x multiplier on the value calculation. And value we define as benefit minus cost minus risk. So we see standardization help accelerate deployments, which is a key component of this more agile environment in meeting changing business needs. We often see workloads and new features deployed in hours or days instead of days or weeks or months. And then it also allows organizations to focus skills on what matters to the business. So less time spent on engineering those fine-grained interactions between technical systems, more time spent on the application and workflows that actually move the business forward. And then standardization also helps reduce cost by minimizing cost of having different tool sets to manage different environments, allowing IT organizations to leverage expertise, and also minimize the exceptions and corner cases that often take the lion's share of effort when it comes to upgrades and maintenance and of infrastructure. And then finally, it also helps, standardization helps reduce risk. That complexity, those corner cases, those exceptions that are introduced by having variability within the infrastructure increase the risk profile in general, because it changes the states or the number of states that the systems may be in. And so standardization also improves consistency, which over time is shown to minimize the risk of security threats and compliance issues and things like that. So again, it's really a single strategy that gives you a 3x multiplier as you move forward to a more dynamic state. So finally, we've got standardizing on the operating system as part of that strategy and standardizing on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Mark, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Kurt. And as we see here in the slide, we believe that a standardization strategy is really anchored on the decision you make on your operating system. And in the case of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, this is a foundational choice that you make, and everything else, of course, runs on top of it. But the choice you make in the beginning sets the tone and the approach for many, many other things down the road. Really, as we know, and we know from decades of history within platform infrastructure, that the operating system is a unique animal, and it comes with and requires many different skill sets, many different tools, many different processes to manage and really run those operating systems. So by standardizing and making a decision on a well-accepted industry standard like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you can take advantage and get great benefit from training, from the tools that exist, and just the wide know-how and knowledge that is out in the market and the industry here. And of course, the standardization also has a big impact on interoperability. And another tenet of the modern-day data center is that as much as standardization is driven, there are still vestiges of heterogeneous infrastructure, and therefore interoperability is a key requirement as well. And ultimately, standardizing on Red Hat Enterprise Linux makes tremendous sense to get the benefits of the agility we've discussed, the business results we've described, and the dynamic IT that the user and the IT organization aspires to, because it does minimize complexity, it reduces risks, and allows you to take advantage of many of the efficiencies that are inherent in the platform itself. And of course, the industry at large is standardizing on Linux, which creates a nice network effect for the industry at large. Red Hat Enterprise Linux, being the leading commercial Linux, also takes great benefit from that trend. If you look at the report where some of the data is cited here on the slide, you'll recognize that from the Linux Foundation that they're citing that 8 out of 10 of the clouds built today run on Linux. That for big data projects, nearly 3 out of 4 companies are choosing to base their big data projects on top of Linux. And that 80% of these organizations are growing their installed base. Not the same with Microsoft Windows Server environments. So not only is Linux just taking off in the industry, but Red Hat Enterprise Linux, with the support of Red Hat as the commercial entity, driving rigorous engineering process, driving a partner ecosystem with hardware OEMs and ISVs, and driving a very leading award-winning customer support organization, really is the best choice you can make to standardize your IT platform and infrastructure around, and ultimately give you the agility to have that deployment flexibility from physical to virtual to cloud. And we have some proof to back up why the standardization story resonates and makes sense. Last year, IDC did a study where they surveyed nearly a couple of dozen IT organizations and looked at 3 distinct scenarios. They looked at pure play free Linux environments. They looked at mixed Red Hat Enterprise Linux and free Linux environments, and then they looked at standardized Red Hat Enterprise Linux environments. And while a bit, kind of the findings were a bit counterintuitive, what they really found was that those organizations who had standardized on Red Hat Enterprise Linux made great gains across several different areas. They had higher staff productivity in terms of staff efficiencies around more servers being managed per administrator, more users on those servers being managed per administrator, quicker deployment time. They had fewer user issues to the help desk, which drove user productivity and staffing efficiencies in concert. And ultimately, those systems also were down less frequently. So that also spilled into both staffing efficiencies on the IT side as well as user productivity. So across a number of measures, there were significant findings from IDC, an objective analyst organization, that showed that those companies who had standardized on Red Hat Enterprise Linux far and away realized significant efficiencies and cost savings.
Great. Well, thanks, Mark. So I think that just to kind of wrap things up here with some specific steps you can take, one is to modernize. We talked about that, eliminating fragile artifacts, but that's always a key step in trying to simplify and reduce the pain and friction of having to support systems that don't work as well as they should. So work methodically to re-platform those workloads in an environment using Red Hat Enterprise Linux so they can be easily deployed or re-provisioned if needed to restore service. Then also create a standard OS image or a hardened image that can be used and work to eliminate non-standard images, and then deploy that standard image or golden image across physical and virtual and cloud environments as much as possible, because again, that standardization improves the benefits and drives agility to the business. It helps reduce cost and risk in a data center operations environment. So thanks, Mark, for joining me today. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and good luck with your standardization project.